What's up guys, and welcome back to Adventure Boat. What we have here is Ironman 4x4's brand new, like 2 weeks old, brand new Foamcell Pro full suspension kit for the new 4th gen Tacoma. This thing is absolutely amazing. It's all inclusive and I cannot wait to get these green coils under the new Tacoma. Now the Foamcell Pro that I ended up ordering is the heavy load with everything, front and rear, knowing that I am just going to be maxing this Tacoma out on the front end with the big front bumpers, and then the rear end with drawer system and all the goodies are going back there. So definitely went max load. Also, Ironman doesn't have their upper control arms in production yet, so I ended up having to get these Icon ones, which are fine. They're notorious for these ball joints, the uniballs here kind of blowing out, but hopefully this one lasts a long time. And the only other thing that I had to get with this kit was a precautionary bolt, and these are the upper control arm bolts, because in the 3rd gen they were impossible to get out, so I ended up cutting them and putting them in from the bottom, and it was just so much easier. I think there's a lot more room here in the 4th gen, but either way I have them because you never know. First step is obviously to get the vehicle up in the air, supported, and the front wheels off, which I have already done. Next we're going to remove the ABS bracket bolts off the UCA here and off the spindle right here, and it's coming off with a 12 mil socket. And I always put the bolts right back in so I don't lose them. There's a 3rd ABS bolt hiding down here. I'm also going to remove this little mini mud flap I don't need, and then I'm also going to pull off this blank here that's in front of the body mount. This is just a filler plate. I'm going to pull that off to create more space for the 37s. They're going to be going in here. I'm going to grab my trim tool and just pop these push pins. And that gets the carpet out of the way. And now it's a 17 mil and it looks like it's just 2 bolts and it comes right out. And there's a 3rd bolt hiding down there. And it just hinges on there to stay on. Comes right off. Now we have a lot more room to clear those 37s in here. This big massive bar coming off the backside of the lower control arm, this is the sway bar. It takes 2 19 mil bolts on each side and we're just gonna loosen them. Future Kelly making changes to the plan. Don't loosen the 4 bolts of the sway bar that go into the frame. Loosen the single connector end link on each side. That will make your life a lot easier and you'll get a lot more droop to get those coilovers in and out. Next we're going to remove the through bolt that actually holds the bottom of the coilover into the lower control arm. The nut is on the back side here, and we're going to leave the bolt in but just pull the nut off for now. Now I'm going to use a pair of needle nose pliers to remove the cotter pin from the castle nut. This cotter pin is actually kind of tricky. You got to push it in, then pull out on the one side, and then pull the whole thing out. And then a 19 mil to loosen the castle nut halfway down, and then we're going to strike the top of the spindle here to separate it from the castle nut. Now take your floor jack and put it underneath the lower control arm. A lot of people will just use a strap right here, but I find it just gets in the way of everything you're doing up here with the upper control arm a couple steps down the road. So I like to take a floor jack, put it under the lower control arm, and that will keep this whole thing from flexing too much and messing with your ABS cable. And now we're going to completely remove the castle nut and separate the spindle from the upper control arm. Next step is removing the fender liners on both sides of the coilover here to gain access to the long through bolt of the upper control arm. And we actually use a pair of needle nose pliers to remove those fender flares. You actually stick the needle nose pliers in, grab the little 2 teeth and pinch it in the little long eyelet, and they come right out. It's actually really easy. Now it's time to remove the biggest pain in the butt bolt of the entire system, and that is the bolt that goes through the upper control arm, because it's so long and there's just so much around it. However, here in the 4th gen Tacoma, there's a lot more space than the 3rd gen, which is really nice. So what we have to do is take a 22 mil ratcheting wrench here. We're going to take the nut off first, and then we're going to wiggle this upper control arm around to get that bolt all the way through, and hopefully it goes okay. Not optimistic though. Got the nut and the washer off. Make sure you take note of how these go together, because the nut actually nestles inside of the washer. Now so I'm gonna get that bolt out. I cannot believe how easy this was to get out. The passenger side flew out. There is so much room, the bolt just came right out. It's almost like they engineered it to be able to come out, which is just a crazy thought. But yeah, this passenger side, super easy. Next, take a 14 mil and remove the top 4 bolts of the coilover. Now we're gonna remove this really long through bolt that actually holds the coilover from the bottom, and just kind of wiggle that around, and it's not budging. Now I just released the jack and took all the pressure off the coilover, and now this long bottom bolt just comes right out. I got the factory coilover out and it fought me a little bit. The lower control arm didn't want to flex enough for me to pull that bottom out, so I just really leaned into it and was able to get it out. The bad news is that I put it next to the Ironman Foamcell Pro coilover, and the Foamcell Pro is about 3/4 of an inch longer. That's gonna make it a lot more fun going in here, but that's a problem for about 30 minutes from now. Finally, time to start putting this kit in, and this is the new upper control arm from Icon. Now, Ironman hasn't quite developed their UCA yet. They have it in development, but it's not actually out yet. So this is what I got instead, and these are actually pretty good. They are kind of notorious for this ball here failing at the 50,000 mile mark, so I'm hoping to get a lot of life out of this thing. We'll see how it works out, but it goes in the same way the factory came out. This side of the UCA is nice and tight against this rod. However, there's a good gap right here. We have to fill in with spacers, and Icon gives you a whole lot of washers, so I think 2 should do it. Yeah, that's a good tight fit. So what I'm gonna do is add 1 to each side and we'll space it out perfectly. Now, if you've ever swapped upper control arms, you know that they are just an absolute pain in the ass. This has by far been the easiest one I've ever had to do, even adding the spacers. If you just kind of put pressure on it on each side and then slide the washer in, very, very easy. Now I'm gonna connect the new upper control arm to the spindle, and I'm just installing everything hand tight for now. I'll go back and tighten and torque everything down the road. Now it's time to install the Ironman Foamcell Pro coilover. Now, the directions from Ironman say to remove the 2 bottom spindle bolts and it should drop away. However, there's so much torque on this with the sway bar. I actually disconnected the sway bar to give me a little bit more droop, but even with those 2 bolts loosened, the bottom or the lower control arm isn't falling away. So basically this is as much clearance as we're gonna get. Now I'm gonna grab the coilover and see if we can sneak it in with what we have right now. You'll notice here on the top hat of the Ironman coilover, there's a little notch here on one of the bolts. And this has to go to the back right side when you insert it, that way everything indexes properly. I made an executive decision and basically removed the upper control arm from the spindle to give me all the room I need. If this was up on a lift, I'd be able to sneak it in from underneath here. However, I'm on the ground in my garage and it's just not gonna work. I'm gonna install it with the upper control arm off, and then when we're done, I'll use the jack to compress everything and hopefully still be able to get this upper control arm back into the spindle. I've got 1 bolt in and I've got the bottom of the shock situated in there. Now I'm gonna put the through bolt through to get that in first, then we'll worry about the rest of the top bolts. I'm also using the floor jack to bring up the upper control arm to kind of compress everything to align it all, but there's still a lot of pressure on this brake line, so I'm just using my hand to hold this spindle here. A strap would be helpful, but there's really no place to put it where it wouldn't be in the way. I broke down and ended up throwing a strap on this. There's just too much pressure. I didn't like that brake line being so extended, so while I'm getting this lower bolt in, the strap it is. And I'm using a pin to kind of help me align the shock with the hole. And with a little persuasion from the mallet, and it went right in. Now I'm gonna use a floor jack and lift all this up and try to connect back once again the spindle and the UCA. Now I'm gonna work from the bottom and work my way up, basically going through, and I'm gonna tighten everything down. And then I'm actually just gonna torque it the best I can. Obviously I'm gonna drive a little bit, come back and just retorque everything, because better safe than sorry, and things do come loose when you're on the road. The lower coilover through bolt gets torqued to 89 foot-pounds. The sway bar connection is 103 foot-pounds. However, we are doing good and tight because there's no way I'm gonna get a torque wrench in that tight spot right there. This Icon nut is torqued to 70 pounds. However, the factory is to 117, but I'm using Icon. The upper control arm long through bolt is 136 foot-pounds, but again, there's just not enough room to get the torque wrench in there, so we're just making it good and tight. All I have left now are the 4 top hat bolts on top of the coilover, and then the brake lines, and they all just get snugged very tight. There's no way to get a torque wrench under here, or not one that I have anyway, so we're just gonna make it real tight. This kit looks absolutely sick, and I cannot wait to get it on the road. I'm gonna run over to the driver's side really quick. I'll let you guys know if there's any hiccups or something to be noted. Other side went on great, no issues at all. The only thing we had to do different was there's a rubber pipe coming out of the intercooler. It's 2 little half clips. They just literally like angle up and it pulls right out. It was super simple. I gotta say, huge props to the Toyota engineering team for designing this to actually be able to be worked on. This thing, if this was a 3rd gen Tacoma, this would be 2 days just for the front of the suspension just because of the UCAs. I would have cut them off. I wouldn't have dealt with them at all. These, they come right out. This thing was made to be worked on, and it is just really well engineered. I'm actually pretty surprised how I assumed that 4th gen to 3rd gen, the front suspension at least wouldn't be that much different. And Obviously the geometry of it is very similar, but the way it all goes together is just so much better. I mean, they knocked out of the park with this one. Okay, look at this. Even these little fender liner inserts with these new clips that they have, they just push right on. I mean, how nice is that? So this is what the tires are gonna look like at some point, but not right now. Unfortunately, Toyota changed the lug nut design. It's actually a larger lug nut. It's like M4 by 1.25 or 1.5. So it's a different lug nut. I thought I could get away with using extra lug nuts I had for the 3rd gen Tacoma, but that's not the case at all. So keep that in mind. You will need new lug nuts for your new wheels. Time to start the rear. And step 1 is obviously getting the vehicle up off the ground and the wheels and tires off and out of the way. Now you're also going to want to support the frame of the vehicle and then have a floor jack on the center pumpkin there to raise the axle up and down to make the clearances where you need them. Now the next step, according to the instructions, is to remove the ABS brackets, which I don't feel like you really have to do. There's a lot of clearance right now, so I'm going to wait until I need it before I do it. Next, we're going to take a 17 mil and remove the sway bar link from both sides. I'm also going to use a 10 mil and get rid of these mud flaps. Now I'm going to take a 17 mil and I'm going to take off the bottom bolt of the shock. And remember, we're doing everything on both sides of the vehicle. I'm only showing the one side, but we're doing it on both. That way we can kind of flex the rear end as we're going. Now I'm going to use a 19 mil and a 8 mil to remove the top bolt to the shock. These will tend to spin, so you're using both to hold it on. Well, the 8 mil is a little too big. We're going back to vice grips. Now we're going to remove both rear shocks. Little persuasion came right out. I lowered the floor jack on the pumpkin and it really flexed everything out. And actually the coils are kind of loose now. However, I noticed there was a lot of binding on that ABS line. So I removed one of the brackets and now it's fine. There's plenty of play in it, so it shouldn't be an issue. Now it's time to remove both coils. Press down on the one end of the axle and it just comes right out. If you look at these two coilovers, the Ironman being the green one, obviously, and then the factory one being the black one here, they look almost identical in height. I think they are identical, but Ironman says that they really get the lift because of the compression. It's a much thicker coil. You don't get as much compression, which gives you that extra lift. Also, it's going to make it really nice getting back in because they're not ridiculously longer, so they should slide right in. Now, when installing the coils, you want to make sure that the buckets on the passenger side, the buckets stayed up in there, and it's just a rubber isolator. However, on the driver's side, it fell down, so make sure that goes back up and it goes on the wide mouth end of the coil. There's a wide and a narrow end. Narrow end goes down, and make sure when it sits in the coil, you can see where the coil naturally ends in the bucket. And you want to make sure that when it sits in that bucket, it's off the end by like a 1/4 inch. And if you're putting this in by yourself, feel free to use your knees, your elbows to kind of push the axle down to create that room to be able to index the top in and then be able to push that bottom in. Now you want to disconnect all 3 bolts that hold the bracketry to the ABS at the rear pumpkin. Disconnect all that because you're definitely going to need the room for this whole axle to sag all the way to the ground. I got both coils in, and make sure you go through and visually and manually inspect them so that they're completely seated within the cup and exactly where they need to go. This one on the passenger side wasn't actually seated inside that rubber bushing cup, so I had to kind of pull it to the side and it snapped right in. Same on the bottom. You just want to make sure that it's off of that end so it doesn't rattle just by a pinch. So this is how we're going to build out the shock before we install it. We're going to use this washer here. It goes on the bottom with it cupped going up. And then you have this more solid isolator with the nub facing up also. Then we take this large mouth washer with the cupping facing down, and then we're going to insert it into the post there. So there's going to be metal right here. Then install the washer that has the extrusion on it. We're going to install the isolator that has a little bit of a hollowness to it, and then this big flat washer on top. And of course the bracket is going to be right here. And then don't forget the nut. You'll notice here on the bottom of the Foamcell Pros, this eyelet is actually offset, and you want to offset this whole thing so that the tube is further away from the axle. We're going to make sure we orient it in this direction here. The new rear Foamcell Pro and coilovers are in here in the 4th gen Tacoma, and this looks really good. I am so excited about this kit. All I have to do now is get everything buttoned up and torqued down, starting with the sway bar end links. They go back in with a 17 mil, and it gets torqued to 78 foot-pounds. The top nut here in the shock gets torqued to 37 foot-pounds. However, my torque wrench doesn't fit, so I'm just going to make it good and tight with the wrench. And the bottom shock bolt is a 17 mil and gets torqued down to 72 foot-pounds. And the very last thing you have to do is tighten down the 3 bolts for the ABS lines near the pumpkin on the axle. And we are completely done. This new Foamcell Pro Kit from Ironman on the 4th Gen Tacoma looks absolutely sick. As soon as I get wheels and tires on it, we're gonna come back and I'm gonna do a full walkthrough with you. Actually, you know what, better yet, I leave tomorrow for Overland Expo West. Let's do it there. And here it is, the brand new adventure-built 4th Gen Tacoma, rocking the brand new Ironman 4x4 Foamcell Pro 3.5-inch kit. This kit is awesome, so easy to install. Compared to the 2nd, 3rd Gen Tacomas, the 4th Gen Tacoma is 100% DIY friendly. Anyone can do this kit in your garage. You're not modifying that front cab mount, so easy. Also rocking the 37-inch Firestone Destination MT2s on these Vision Oho 17-inch wheels. This is a great setup. Let me break it down to you this way. This Turbo 4 is excellent pushing 37s. The transmission, no gear change needed. It is absolutely flawless. I was able to use cruise control on the freeway, which I haven't been able to do hardly at all in my 3rd Gen Tacoma. It's such a good setup. The new Ironman Foamcell Pro Kit handles like a dream on the road, and I can't wait to get it on the trails and report back on how it handles. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this install. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you guys next time.